Okay, welcome everybody. Thanks for sticking with us as I work through a couple of technical difficulties. Um, I'm really excited about today's stream. I've known Tyler kind of, I guess, virtually for a while, but in preparation for this conversation, I went down so many rabbit holes at an absolutely like stunning career. I want to just frame this with some of the work he's done before we start digging into it. So Tyler Bates began as a rock musician playing guitar, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But just so you can see like where he's come, he's composed for the Deadpool franchise, Guardians of the Galaxy franchise, John Wick franchise, 300, Watchmen, Sucker Punch, Atomic Blonde, many more. 11 of those films opened number one at the box office. He's also written and composed for television, Californication, Salem, The Punisher, The Exorcist. He wrote for the California Adventure Ride for Guardians of the Galaxy. He also collaborated on Marilyn Manson's record, The Pale Emperor, which Rolling Stone hailed as the #1 metal album of 2015. He reprised that work in 2017, working on the Heaven Upside Down record. We'll talk about many of the musicians that he's collaborated with in our deeper conversation. For folks on Twitch that are gamers, he's written for God of War Ascension, Killzone Shadowfall, Far Cry New Dawn. And one of the things that's really kind of fun and exciting, and I ran through just over the past few days, is he both directed and composed for Dark Knight's metal soundtrack. Their Metalverse. It's really fun, and he pulled in so many wonderful musicians and voice actors for that. So we'll talk more about that. I could go on really, and we'll touch on this. I mean, the man has composed for Cirque Du Soleil, and way back where I think some of his musical stylings actually began, and I want to talk about this with the band Pet, which was signed when he was a younger person. So, without further ado, let me bring on Tyler Bates. There you are, Tyler. I need to frame you in a little bit better. That's my...
Right. We're on about a 4-second repeat. So I'm hearing you, and then I'm coming back around 4 seconds later.
Okay, no sweat. So Tyler, you are a man of many musical... Like you've taken your music into so many different channels. And I want to actually touch on a great many of them and talk about some of the, the way that you've approached going into those. I have to tell you that one of the things that fascinates me and excites me about you is the narrative sense that you bring to your work. It's something that I do some of myself. And you've managed to do this, so much of this, in the absence of lyrics. And of course, that's what composers do. But across the very many different mediums and the styles that you've sort of leaned into as you've approached film and games and television and live theater, et cetera, I've been able, because I've spent so much time digging into your work, to see how you've sort of artfully made choices in order to communicate the narrative. And I'm sure I'm just scratching the surface, but I want to talk about that. So, and because we're on Twitch, I think it's only right that we start with video games. But before we begin, let's just see how you're doing.
Okay, so I'm going to try and keep my head clear because I'm hearing everything back twice 4 seconds later. Oh. So it's like my normal inside voice. Actually, I'm doing well. Been really busy working with a number of artists as of late. And, every day I have someone in the studio. Today, David Hasselhoff will be here in about an hour, but Dave's nice. A friend of mine, and I just like to help him every now and again knock out a song. And he and I have had some fun performing before. So I'm working on a couple of records right now. Just finished up the Dark Knight's death metal soundtrack album that'll be released in June. That's exciting.
Yeah.
And also working with Ty West on a couple new movies of his. He has a movie called titled X with Kid Cudi in it, and a great cast altogether. And while he was setting it up in New Zealand, he wrote the prequel, and so that was greenlit. So they're happening back to back, and then I have a few other films and TV projects coming up. But yeah, I'm happy to talk about whatever.
Yeah. Well, good. Let's start with some of your video game background. I have a little bit of an insight here because I worked at Xbox for 15 years. And I became pretty good friends with guys like Martin O'Donnell, who scored the Halo. You know, he helped write that original big Halo theme, and working with the studio head there, who very much saw Halo, despite its success with its deathmatch, its multiplayer, very much thought about it as a narrative, as a story, and kind of required that of the composer to help bring that to life. And in listening back, and I want to talk about some specifics with games, but in listening back to a bunch of your work, it absolutely kind of leaps out. So first, I just want to sort of commend you. It's not a surprise to me, following your journey as a composer, that this is a natural medium for you. But I wonder if the approach changes at all with video games versus other sort of cinematic mediums like film or television.
It certainly is different. And I'd like to start by saying that I had two windows open, and that's why I was having the feedback loop.
Oh.
So here I am. The irony is that I'm working with software and very technically oriented gear all day long. And, I don't have my axe.
You and me both, man.
So video games, the thing that's really great about them is the developers are inspired by art, for one, and there's a great deal of respect for everyone in their task on a video game. They're created by fans of the games and games themselves, which is not necessarily the case in all entertainment medium. But in a video game, there's an objective, and oftentimes you may be cued to write an orchestral score or a non-orchestral score. There are points of emphasis, but the latitude that you have as a composer is pretty wide open compared to that of, say, a huge film. The larger the film, the less latitude you probably have these days, just because of the nature of which they're made. Now we'll see what happens post-COVID, or let's say we're not going to be post-COVID for some time, but at this juncture where the box office is not the same type factor as it was a year ago, a little more than a year. So perhaps the process will change, but nonetheless, video games are being produced the same as they have been always.
Yeah.
And gamers are as avid as ever. So I don't see there being an adverse adjustment to the creative process. What I do love about video games is there is a great deal back and forth with the developers. They share art that's being developed, either inspired by other art or within the game, and as those images materialize, that informs the music. Oftentimes you're working on segments of the game as opposed to in a linear fashion, where you may in a film almost always work in a linear fashion, or like a television show. Usually the TV shows are locked by the time we take a look at it, with the showrunner and the editor and music supervisor, everyone is creatively involved. So that's a different process, but a game can be a little bit more tangential in the approach. And I think oftentimes game developers are looking for the composer to really hone in on what the world of that game feels like and sounds like specifically. And that challenge is quite fun. And definitely, again, I would say it leaves a tremendous amount of latitude for a composer to be inventive and to really explore your mind. So
yeah,
I do enjoy that.
Do you find, I've worked with a lot of studios, not as a composer, but when I was with Xbox, I worked with both third-party publishers like EA and Ubisoft and Take-Two, but I also worked with internal studios like 343 and Turn 10, and I've each studio had its own culture, and so do you find you have to sort of get the feel of their expectation, or, God forbid, maybe you find someone inside who fashions themselves a composer and really wants to give you notes. So do you find it kind of a sameness working, across the various studios you've had to compose for?
Well, of course, the culture is not exactly the same at every studio, and it's paramount to the success of a composer and to the role of music as it supports the game itself. It's paramount to get the correct information, and a bigger game may have a more of a cultural, or let's say a corporate culture in the company. Yeah. Some of these more indie games are a bit more freewheeling, and they'll support you really swinging kind of wide with your ideas, or at least the exploration of your ideas, experimentation. Sure, often there is a composer person working on a game, a film, TV show, whatever. At this point in my life, I'm just open to whatever anyone has to say. I'm inclusive. I certainly am not threatened by great ideas that come from someone other than myself. So the most I can set the table for camaraderie, I always do, no matter what I'm working on. This is a team sport. There's, if I want to put out my record, then it's incumbent upon me to write and release that record. Yeah. It's a different game when we're making, creating content for, other studios.
Yeah, it sounds like you've worked with so many sort of leaders of entertainment. You've either had or you've evolved that skill, because there is a sort of art to the interfacing with people, and part of it is because they're so. It doesn't come from any ill intent. They're so passionate about the game. These are developers who sometimes are working deep into the night. Food's brought in for dinner. I mean, it is their life. So, by the way, I want to dig into a couple of the that we couldn't possibly address all of your music, but I want to dig into a few of the things you've done and talk about them. In fact, let's just do that now. So I was tooling around YouTube, and I pulled up the Far Cry New Dawn main theme, and it's awesome. The notes I took is you made use of some like cool synth pads, but there was this really intriguing blend of sort of futuristic, but like not throwback, but there was one of the things that I think you do so well with a lot of this music is you're a guitar player. I believe that was one of your first instruments, right? And you bring the guitar so sort of artfully into the composition in a way that, there's a bunch of soundtrack music. I was a child of the 80s, and I still have a fondness for a lot of those soundtracks, but they don't age well. What I hear you do so very well is the integration of guitar in instrumentation in a way that it feels of part of the composition. And some of these compositions, because you've been at this for so long, have been around for decades, and they continue to have that same sort of resonance to them. I wonder, like, what is your process for a sort of instrument selection in order to evoke this? Because I know I've heard you talk about you. One of the ways you want to come at your music is narratively. So is it instinctive, or do you kind of associate certain instruments and sounds with emotions and ideas, and then pair them from a more intellectual perspective?
It depends on the medium. For certain, if I'm working on a film, the dialogue becomes an instrument in the composition. So I factor in the cadence of a given actor's dialogue and the timbre of their voice.
Wow.
I want to support that or frame that so that the music can really do its job and will not be turned down extremely low in the mix. So I need to leave space for dialogue always. And obviously, any medium is about storytelling and emotion. Even if you're engaging a player in a game, it's still an emotional experience. And nowadays, there's definitely a story involved in every game. But with film and television, that's most important to me. And then I guess it depends on the style of the film. A score for Guardians of the Galaxy is much different than that of, say, 300, but they both bear similarities in that there are emotional sequences, there are violent sequences, there are headspace moments. And I really just tap into some of my own experiences in life, my own thoughts. And from there, I use perhaps my instincts to select whichever palette of instruments I think would best serve a scene or a film.
One of the things I saw some YouTube video, and you actually talked about this in an article. One of the things that you do that I find really refreshing is at the front end of collaborative music process, at least some of the time, before there's all of this sort of formal dialogue, you'll pick up a guitar and start to play. And start to create like a musical language and experience with the other person. I'd love for you to talk more about that, because I know in my own personal musical experience, there's just so much conversation and formality and those kinds of things that it almost becomes an impediment to the creative process. And I saw you just picking up guitar and starting to jam with guys, right from the go. So,
well, yeah, I don't often write scores on guitar, even though, in the morning when I brush my teeth, I see myself as a guitarist, Yeah. There is a blue collar element to me just because I'm always just had to work my ass off to get anywhere and never had a backup plan or a safety net, so to speak. So I love the guitar. But in the context of being a composer, oftentimes you really are thinking bigger picture. And if I'm having a conversation initially in my studio, let's say now we're talking throwback era, but in my studio with producers and a director or music supervisor, and there's a conversation happening, there's a lot of conjecture or pontification about what the score can be or will be. That's Teddy in the background, by the way.
Hey, Teddy.
So at any rate, if there's someone trying to communicate a point, something they think about the film, I'll try and reiterate that in the form of a musical expression, whatever the instrument may be, to reflect that back to them. That way I've included someone in the musical conversation without them necessarily being required to speak in musical terminology, and for them to know they've been heard early on. Oftentimes their ideas are fantastic, and we at least try our best to run them up the flagpole to see if they work. I am very mindful that if something fails on a project, I will most likely find another work opportunity somewhere in my life, but it could be the final opportunity for a producer or a director, because those projects are so hard to get greenlit.
Yeah.
So I take this with a great deal of responsibility, regardless of the budget of the film. It doesn't matter. If I say yes, it's 1,000%. Everything I can do to create a working process that's enjoyable and fun for everybody, and also very constructive, and allows anyone who has a creative investment in the project to interact with me and offer their ideas, their 2 cents, and I'll weigh all of that considerably in my composing endeavor. So yeah.
I'm kind of wondering where you were at when I started my first band. that sensibility of collaboration. Maybe we were all just too young back then.
Wait! Don't get me wrong. I don't think there's anything. I don't think there's any truth to a great band with a democracy. I don't believe in that, really. Yeah. I think there are, at best, are two people with great ideas and other people who are excellent in supporting roles who bring great ideas to the table.
Yeah.
That's what I see with band philosophy. And I've been a band leader majority of my life. So, that said, like the movies, TV, games, it's all a team sport.
Yeah. Yeah. You're right on both. Well, I don't know the second world. I know the first world, and you're right about that. Okay, I want to move on. I want to talk about your work with DC Comics. I spent some time. I went through the whole Sonic Metalverse. Before we dig into that, they've just announced a band edition, didn't they? Just a couple of months ago.
That was an unrelated. That was like an international marketing thing they did. So they did do some custom comic covers with like Ozzy and some other artists that have nothing to do with our project and have nothing to actually do with the comics themselves.
Okay.
So that was done completely without DC North America's knowledge as we were developing our project, and our project is its own thing. So The concept behind what I put together with Matt Keller at DC Comics is to create an album that is comprised of songs that are directly inspired by Scott and Greg's work on Dark Knight's Death Metal, the actual comic series. So each song on the soundtrack directly relates to an issue of the comic. And this began during COVID, and because it was a little bit more challenging to get people physically together, some of us did manage to get together safely during that time, but people are spread out around the world. So what I wanted to do was to truly authenticate the point of having a soundtrack like this, of songs for a comic book, was to create the motion comic. So we just did that in-house here for fun.
Yeah.
It's not like it wasn't a paid job or anything. And so I got a couple of my friends to voice some classic DC characters like Jason Moore from The Punisher and Hasselhoff does Superman. And my friend Charles Fleischer, who was the voice of Roger Rabbit, he did the Joker. And then the artist on the album, I got everybody to voice characters, classic DC characters. So that was super fun. Chelsea Wolfe did Wonder Woman, and she did a very dry version or expression of Wonder Woman. And once fans started hearing that, they really liked that a lot. And, Denzel Curry was fantastic. Andy Hall was great. I mean, we had a lot of great enthusiasm and participation. And really, me as a fan of all this stuff, I found it necessary to communicate to the fans of DC Comics, the fans of comics, graphic novels, that this music has a point. It's not some BS widget that was cultivated to make a buck. It was really a celebration of the medium and the talent of Greg Capullo and Scott Snyder and their whole team of brilliant artists. So that's really what it was about. And I had a great time working with a ton of artists on this album.
So these are all folks that you knew that you were able to just sort of call up and ask a favor, or did you have someone helping you source? Because let me just say out loud, and you can correct me if my notes are wrong, but Dave Lombardo did drums. You had Jerry Cantrell was part of this. Fred Curry from Cinderella. Brand Daler from Mastodon. There's A-list musicians that are part of this this project that you directed. Are these folks you have on speed dial?
Well, we prefer A-listers. Okay, so once we got going with the project, I made a deal with Loma Vista Records as my label for this project. So I serve as the executive producer, and then I produce some of the songs, co-produce some. So it just depends what the situation happens to be. But yeah, Dave Lombardo is one of my very close friends. Jerry Cantrell, super close friend. We just finished working on his new solo record, and I co-produced that with Jerry. For instance, the band Health, they're friends of mine, and they are on Loma Vista. So Loma wanted them on the album, and actually I suggested they be on it because we've worked together before and we're friends. So we wrote a song together, and then Loma asked about having a guest vocalist on it. And Chino Moreno is Jake and John's favorite singer. So I ran it by them. I'm like, what do you think about if Chino were to sing on this? And they'd be like, yeah, that'd be dope, man. That's too much to even imagine right now. I'm like, okay, so well, let me ask Chino. And I'd worked with Chino before on the Dark Nights Metal album, which really did not receive appropriate publicity and promotion because all of the champions of that particular record were gone from the label by the time we finished the album. So not Loma Vista, a different label. Anyway, we had a great creative experience. All of us working together, and Chino was, I hit him up and he's like, yeah, sure, send me the track. And so he sent his track back a couple days later. Ron did a track with us on the first album, and so he was down. And then Andy Biersack from Black Veil Brides is a super, super Batman fan. So once he started voicing Batman, DC like flipped out. They're like, you have to do a song with Andy. I'm like, cool, I'll talk to him. And he's like, yeah, I'm down to do it. And Loma Vista wanted to, they asked if we could do it as a duet with someone. And I'm like, sure. So I had worked with Maria Brink before, also on the first album. And I think she's a great artist and super cool. So I called her and asked her if she'd be down. She's like, yeah, sure. And then really only after talking for a while did I realize that her band and Andy's band had been scheduled to be on tour, but COVID wiped that out. And now they've rescheduled that tour starting September. So both of them are on the song, Meet Me in the Fire. And I think that's going to be the first emphasis track off the record. And then the two of them will team up for a co-headline tour in the fall. So
that's cool.
That was sort of serendipitous how that worked out.
So you told us, but remind us when that's releasing.
The album will release digitally June 19th, I think. And then July, the vinyl will be released, I think, on the 16th. There are some bands that I brought to the table before I even made a record deal for it that I'm very excited about. A young band, Starcrawler, and they've already done a lot of really great things for a young band. I think they're 20 or so, and they've already played Japan like 5 times.
Yeah.
But under the direction of Gilbert Trejo, they're filming an epic music video to coincide with the song from the album. And Hasselhoff's going to be in it, and Danny Trejo's going to be in it. It's going to be really fun.
Wow, that's
and the
cool.
song's really cool. So I'm excited about them. I worked with Gunship, which is a band from the UK, and they're a more electronic 80s style, and they're really fantastic. And so when we were having a creative conversation about working together, they asked if they kept referencing Slayer. And I'm like, well, what are you talking about? Exactly about Slayer. It's like this drum beat from this song. And so this one guy, Dan Hay, was just saying that, I would love to have like a drum beat with that attitude and kind of that vibe. I'm like, well, why don't we just have Dave play it? So they just kind of flipped out over that. And of course, Dave is always down to do cool stuff. So he did a great job, of course. And it was fun to connect with so many of my friends during a time when we were socially distanced or unable to actually spend time together. So it was great to connect through music.
Well, it's everything I've heard so well done. I think the motion comics amazing. I just went through them, and you directed those.
Yeah, and I know it's kind of a batshit crazy project to do because it's so much work.
Yeah.
Because what we're dealing with is like the raw art panels, right? Which was very cool of Scott and Greg and DC to afford us and trust me with that task. And then Lorena Perez Batista, who works with me, she helped with the editing. And it's really interesting because I have to source out the vocal, dialogue performances with whomever I can get at the time. And they come in whenever they come in. And then we have to work with it and try and get a picture together. It's not at all like making a movie or making a TV show or more like a game maybe, but it's really quite a Rubik's Cube to turn into anything. It was done with duct tape and we had fun doing it, but that was a hell of a lot of work.
Well, you know what I like about it is it has a very it has the feeling of something that's been done without all the slick, $1 million, and for that it to me it feels like it's closer to the fans. I go to Comic-Con almost every year. And there's the really glitzy stuff that they do down in South Hall with all the new media and the show and stars. You wait in line like you do for a ride at Disneyland to even go in. And then there at the other far end, there's the old guys that have been there forever who are just selling comics. And there's just this almost tactile experience you have by touching an old comic and talking to people who have loved these stories and these characters and these worlds forever. And there was that, I got that feeling watching this. And I think it's it was a consequence of the way you pulled it together, but I think it's amazing. And the music is I'm not here just to don you with faint praise. Actually, I thought it was a wonderful project. And I think fans of DC, have you had reaction? Is anybody, I know they're fairly recent within the last 6 months, right?
Yeah. And we didn't really even promote them yet. So they'll swing back around at the album release, and we may compile something that would be like a short half-hour film that would cover the scope of the entire comic series. But your perception is on point. I didn't want it to be slick at all.
Yeah.
And that's why when I solicited each of the artists to give me their interpretation of the character, I mean, they were all very excited. Like Andy Hall from Manchester Orchestra was like, oh my God, I get to voice Lex Luthor. That's sick, And so it was great to feel that enthusiasm from as fans, like everybody on this album are fans of comics. And I'm a fan of this whole world. I wouldn't say that record companies entirely understand Comic-Con and WonderCon and all this stuff like us nerds do, but I wanted it to be homespun. I wanted fans to know that this was made by fans. Sometimes things can be too slick and it can, kind of fall flat. I feel like, this is just kind of some crap that's just put out there. I want to experience stuff that feels like I'm discovering something when I'm finding new music. So to do this was something that I felt was really cool that DC allowed me to make such a crude, rough-honed, vehicle with their intellectual properties.
Well, and that actually is one of the questions I was going to ask is, did you, I've worked with IP before and there's often a story Bible and a whole list of commandments of things thou shalt not do. Did you have some kind of guardrails, or did they sort of know that you would trust, they trusted you with this because they knew that as a fan, you would do right by it?
Remarkably, they trusted me.
That's so cool, man.
They gave me a script and they said, here's a script, use it as your guide. And the great thing was that both Greg Capullo and Scott Snyder were totally into it and voiced characters. And those guys are extremely busy, like all of us, but they took the time out to do it. This is like, no one was paid for doing this. We all just did it because we love it.
Yeah.
And that was great because that was their endorsement. And that tells the fans, like, look, we're into this and we know what it is. And, I think we all enjoyed the fact that it's not a corporate feeling endeavor. I mean, DC is massive, so
Yeah.
usually any kind of products that come from DC from within are produced pretty tight, and I wanted it not to feel that way. I wanted it to feel like, like a Slayer record, like an early record. When you put it on, it's like, if I keep listening, I think something bad might happen. There's an indie quality to it that makes it exciting, that that it hasn't been poured over by executives or focus grouped or anything like that. This was literally last second out the door. We worked as hard as we could to make them good. Some of them are better than others. Some of the voice performances are better than others, but everybody put their heart and soul into their participation, which was awesome.
No, everybody that's seeing this, I'm hoping will go and take a look. I actually watched them all on your own personal website.
Thank you.
But I want to, there's this thing that I discovered. I'm sure I'm not the first, but as I've listened now to your music all the way back to Pet, and the track Little Boots in the verses, all the way through to even the first episode of this Sonic Metalverse that you just released, I think I can hear certain signature things about Tyler Bates. And one of the things that you so artfully have done when it's called for is you find these halftones. You find this way to bend out of like a perfect note. In the same way that Steve Vai was he popularized this Xavian scale, which was like 16 notes to the octave, and wrote on his big Sex and Religion record. He had a song that Devin Townsend sang that kind of, was the first place you heard this. But you do this so well, and it creates this wonderful tension in the song. And I wanted to ask you about this. I don't know how much of this, I always ask this of artists, is this instinctive, or is this something that, you create as a skill or a tool that's in your sort of musical tool belt that you pull out when you need to achieve a certain effect? Because I heard it certainly in some of your scores, your film scores, where you're doing this and it creates this sort of sonic experience with this beautiful tension. I love it. So, are you aware of this, or is this just all natural for you?
No, I'm aware of it. It's not. Let's see. I mean, I'm conscientious of it.
Yeah.
I'm not thinking, oh, well, I'm going to do this.
Yeah.
Certainly, with movies like Dawn of the Dead and Devil's Rejects, I thought myself as a fan of movies, there's nothing that's going to scare me. So I experimented a lot with pulling pitches and rhythms apart in the scores just to make you uneasy. If you have a rhythm that is in tempo and then the elements start to fall out of tempo, it makes your heartbeat a little bit uncomfortable.
Right.
Your palms start to sweat when pitches start to pull away from one another because your brain's trying to reconcile the pitch.
Yeah.
So that came by way of a study that I had done going into Dawn of the Dead, but I've always had that aspect to my guitar playing. I mean, back in the day, of course, there was the guitar abuse that I participated in and led to me quitting and giving all my guitars away and then rebooting a couple months after that. But that tension is something that I feel. I like the feeling of something about to maybe fall apart in a transition. I mean, Led Zeppelin, obviously great band, always had that tension in their transitions. And I would attribute a lot of that to John Bonham. His drumming was definitely that. And it provided that. But even just my work, like with Manson, I didn't want everything to feel perfectly in tune. Because I wanted that work to be a little bit more personal than previous works he'd done. Now, mind you, I don't always play semi out of tune. I mean, the guitar's in tune; it's all my hands.
Yeah, that's what.
But but I think it's fun to play with. I think it's effective if you do land chords, you know, and you reestablish pitch, you reestablish tempo. I think then that it's effective. It doesn't make me feel good just to be outside of pitch always.
Sure.
Yeah.
No, I that's not the impression I got at all.
Yeah, but it's an emotional thing. It's definitely an emotional thing, I would say.
Yeah, it was always in service of coming back to some resolution point. And I thought it very effective. And to be frank, it's not a compositional technique that I hear very often, which is, I think, one of the reasons that it sort of leapt out at me. And I began to see it as just a tool that you use that I think you do use effectively. You mentioned Marilyn Manson, so let's talk about that. I read the story. I think you met on the set of Californication. Is that accurate?
Yes. Yeah.
How did from that meeting? How did that eventuate in your co-writing and producing and touring with him?
Oh my God.
Big story.
That's a long, complicated story, this man. So we met on the set of Californication because there was an episode toward the end of season 6. It was the end of season 6, and he had played himself on the show, and there was a wedding taking place at the Greek Theater in LA, and Tom Kapanos, the show creator, wanted to have a live concert so that the environment was authentic. So many of the actors on Californication are musicians, like David Duchovny and of course Steve Jones from that season, from the Sex Pistols, and Tim Minchin was the lead in that season, and Manson wanted to participate in this live show even though he wasn't in the episode. I don't think. Maybe he had a one shot or something in it. So anyway, for whatever reason, when I first met him, we had a little bit of a contentious beginning. I wasn't really drinking the Kool-Aid, so to speak, at first, but he was persistent with me, and it was the strangest thing. We did perform together a couple of times because there was the show episode where we did a short set, and then 2 days later we did a wrap party for the season having completed its filming. And they do huge parties that are like concerts with, tons of alcohol and everything else going on, and food trucks. And it's a really great event that they threw. And so I MD'd those events. And so we played a couple times, and Manson, started talking to me about doing something together. And that went on for like a year. And then finally, we did another Californication concert, even though he wasn't involved in the final season. And at that point, he asked if he could come to my studio. And so, I told him if he was very serious, then yeah, about reinventing is what I said. If you're very serious about reinventing, sure. So that's where we began. I know that obviously at the moment, there's a lot of very distressing accounts out there about people's experience with Manson, and those are to be taken very seriously. But I would say that he's a complex person, and I had a lot of great times working with him, creating with him. He definitely turned me on to a lot of great music and literature and art. That's more the side of my experience. Sure. The extremely dark side is not something that I experienced personally so much. Obviously, there's the theatrics that occur on tour. I mean, he made it so I could go on tour at my availability. So
nice.
They allowed me to put the band together. So it was all my friends. And then I could step in when I was available. So I was able to go out and tour with him, do about 110 shows, all over the world, which was great, especially considering that's where I began. I did Vans Warped Tour, all that stuff, and never had the opportunity to play for 20 to 50,000 people at a time. And so I had plenty of those experiences playing music I had written with Manson with my friends in the band. and that was great. But enough was enough, and I had left that, probably 3.5 years ago almost. And
do you think you'll ever go back out on tour? Is that an itch you have, or did you satisfy your need there?
Well, Jerry Cantrell wants me to go out and play in support of his record. I mean, I'm really more interested in supporting stuff that I've written personally, but sure. Jerry's a close friend. And again, that would be my buds. We'd have a great time. So I would do that. I've done some shows with Jerry, and, he's one of the finer human beings that I know. So it would be great.
His Alice in Chains, out of that, I ended up in Seattle because of the whole grunge explosion, and of all of the bands that came out of that era, for me, Alice in Chains is far and away the best. Just
always was for me too.
Yeah, there's a uniqueness and timelessness to their music that, as much as some of those other bands are really great, they were just, I don't know, they kind of hit my cookies, so to speak. I just so if you do that tour, please come to Seattle.
Well, that's inevitable.
Yeah,
and you know what's
right? Yeah.
You know what's been really great is for the DC album, one of the songs on it is a song I wrote with Greg Puciato, who was the leader of Dillinger's Escape Plan, right? Yeah. Dillinger's Escape Plan.
Yeah.
And then Gil Sharon, who was in Manson's band, is the drummer, but does a ton of things, and he was in Dillinger years ago and was the drummer on one of their records. So those two are good friends. And Gil's the one who suggested that I introduce Jerry Cantrell and Greg because we did some shows with Jerry, just kind of a retrospective of his career. We did a couple of shows in December of 2019, and he and Greg just became fast friends. And Greg sings all that material that's represented by Lane Staley so well. Not to ape Lane Staley, because Greg is a badass in his own right, and he has way too much respect for Lane Staley to try and emulate him. But the way he and Jerry hang together, the way they sing together is really great. And so he sings a lot on Jerry's new record with him.
Oh, that's cool.
So it makes me feel really good that those two have become great friends, and the prospect of us all going out and playing shows together would be a blast.
Yeah. I hope that happens. I'll keep my fingers crossed for that.
It will.
And we can meet in person when you come through town. I'll be there. And Lane Staley, I studied voice with the same guy who trained Lane. And he was fond of having pictures of all of his students on the wall. And there was this great picture of Lane in his band before Alice in Chains, which was actually a glam thing. Very sort of different persona. And it's fun for me to listen to him because I can hear tonally, I can hear exactly what he's doing relative to what he learned. There's a famous vocal trainer here by the name of David Kyle. Trained some really big voices like Jeff Tate and Ann Wilson, and Lane is one of the guys who came through his studio. And he was my vocal trainer was actually the one that turned me on to them. So big fan. But I look forward to hearing. Is this new record that is coming out? Were you part of the production element of that?
Yeah.
And so
it's been a conversation Jerry and I've had for 2 years.
Okay.
And so, I just helped set the table to make it all happen more organically than locking out a studio and bringing in musicians or hiring musicians. It's all friends that perform on the record.
That's cool.
Yeah.
All right. Any timing you can clue us in on with that?
We should see it this fall.
Okay. That's great.
Yeah.
That's exciting.
It's a fantastic record. And it's not, I don't think it's exactly what people might expect if they were to expect one thing over the next. But I think the songwriting is phenomenal. The lyrics are really, really great. And the whole record is like a very cinematic experience. So I think people will really enjoy it.
Oh, that's exciting. Yay. Okay, let's take our last few minutes and talk about some of the big films you've worked on. I'm sure these are things you've spoken about before, but I know folks who are with us here watching us have some interest in this. You've worked on some of, I think, the biggest and most fun film franchises over the last many years. And as in doing some sort of background work on this, I learned that you created this this rapport with James Gunn that was really unique, such that and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but they actually played some of your music during production, which I think is different. And I was hoping you'd talk to us a little bit about that and the actor's reaction to actually acting while musical themes are playing.
In theory, it's an awesome opportunity to begin to develop the musical language for a film, especially a franchise like Guardians of the Galaxy. So yeah, James and I had done, I don't know, I think I did like a 10 or 11 shorts with him and two movies before we got into Guardians. And so I started writing some sketches based on our conversations. And the first thing I did was I just called it Black Tears. And I think it's still that on the first soundtrack album. But it's more like a post-rock orchestral thing that still has a lot of grandeur to it. So this franchise has been really interesting in that it affords me the opportunity to really state grand themes, huge themes that are almost like throwbacks, because it's very rare that films have long melodic themes. They're usually just little licks that we recognize as the theme. But yeah, this gives us kind of a long throw. And the great thing in working on the music in advance was James and I would, just push these ideas back and forth. And by the time he got into production on the first film, there were perhaps, 6 or 7, themes that were integral to the movie that he would play on the set. And the actors enjoy that so much. When I visited the set, Chris Pratt had remarked to me immediately, he's like, dude, that was so effing amazing to work with the music cranked up on the set. And then I was in a scene on that movie, but when they got to reshoots, I asked them to shoot me out of the movie because I was too busy writing the music for the movie. But I felt what it was like when they were playing Cherry Bomb on set. I'm like, all right, this is pretty awesome, what it does for your mindset. So what it enabled, the information it gave the actors was kind of the syntax of the movie, because it's a lot of green screen and it really helped fill in some of the blanks. So going into the second film, I repeated the same type thing, and it definitely helped us get down to the heart of what the major themes would be in that film. The only issue is that it requires a ton of time to develop that, and that's kind of outside the scope of the job that I'm hired to do. So there have been times where I've not been able to do that on projects because I'm busy on a few things, and as it is on a regular week, I'll work 70 hours. So when I get up to 85, I just don't have any more in me,
Yeah. Juices.
So, but I do enjoy it. I've done that with John Wick, those movies. We've been able to lay up some of the themes, but in Guardians on the second one, they actually shot with earbuds in the actors' ears and they digitally removed them in post.
Wow. That's cool. I'm not an actor, but I have my emotional response to music is such that I would have to think it would create a feeling, help you feel things that you wouldn't otherwise.
Yeah,
I think
I'm not an actor. I'm so not an actor. Totally not. I'm fine smashing a guitar, but if you want me to carry a line, you're in trouble.
That's not me either. I can't do it. I wanted to talk a little bit about some of your other films. So you scored 300, and I hadn't known that. I went back and listened to the soundtrack for that. And I think what it leads me to, and maybe it's more of a comment, but there's you really have this broad ability to attack or interpret and score for different kinds of movies. The soundtrack to 300, there's a whole bunch of very percussive stuff, almost tribal. There are places in there where there's I don't know what the woman is singing, but it's like in an Arabic scale against some of the other music, and it's got an entire feeling all its own. And then I go to a film like the Day the Earth Stood Still, and it's so ambient. And you use the very, very subtle use of bells. In fact, there's one song, and this could be me just like getting too deep inside my head, but you have these chimes or something at the front end of a song. I think I have it in my notes, but at the end of the song, that same chime is reversed. And I thought, wow, how subtly awesome to see the tones being used in different ways inside the same. But the feeling I came away with is your ability to stretch to the purpose of the film. And I wondered, is that, how much of that is you being a student as a musician of film and of the process and being thoughtful and reacting to all of the input? And how much of that do you think is, innate, not so much programmatic, but more instinctive?
It's a combination. Again, my job is to best interpret the sensibility of a director and others who are creatively invested in the outcome of a movie so that I can get the correct information. Really, my education about film score came through working with directors, producers, music editors and editors, re-recording mixers. I started just because someone asked me at a party or a barbecue or something if I could write some music for their movie.
Nice.
I did like 18 movies before I ever even met someone who'd written music for a movie.
Is that right?
So,
wow.
Yeah. So I was definitely finding my way through the dark. My 15th movie was a bebop score that Blue Note released. So that's perhaps a moment where I really thought, I could do this. I could be into it. Every movie's pretty terrifying when I begin, because the expectations that I have of myself and that others do is quite high.
Yeah.
And rarely do I meet that mark, but I try. But yeah, I've always been a student of music. I love all styles of music.
Yeah.
There's great music in all styles, all genres of music. There's garbage too, but
sure.
But again, I'm really thinking about the storytelling, thinking about the emotion of that story and the sensibilities of the director, and that really influences my choices.
Yeah. Well, I think your answer is right, of course, but I think when you began, you must have had some really, really good instincts, because even in some of your early films, maybe before you had, had as much experience with the process and with the people, the music it sits really well against the narrative. It's the kind of thing I noticed just because I care a lot about the narrative motion in music. So it's just a compliment. I think it's something that you were born with and something that you have been right to encourage and nurture.
Well, I appreciate that. I'm still wondering what I'm doing with my life, but well, I've always been like a band leader and always written the majority of the music for the bands that I've worked with. But back in the day, I would look for a great singer to work with, and whatever their style was is what I would write for, because it was much more difficult to link up with people when I was younger. So I've always been mindful and sensitive to the objective of the singer and what I can create that will frame their talent in the best way possible. So I think that experience really helped me with film scoring. And conversely, working with directors helps me now working with every artist that's in my studio, and no two processes are the same. Everybody has their own way of working. So working on films allows me to adapt and be intuitive to that.
Well, let's talk about a song that you did fairly recently. It was, and if I get this name mispronounced, it, let me know. But Michael Caravolo's "Beauty and Chaos." You reimagined a track of his called "Temple of Desire," and that song is I got chills listening to that song. It has this haunting. It's not the same kind of song, but it has that same haunting quality that Chris Isaak's Wicked Game has. You just listen to it, and there's just this beauty and this haunting melody, and the music that you wrote to highlight Perlman's voice. I mean, that song deserves a lot more recognition. And one, the song's gorgeous, but two, I wanted to know how did you go about reapproaching a song that was already kind of a good song and inhabiting it in a way to, I guess, give it your own signature? Because this, by the way, this rendition, much as the first one, this rendition I think is superior. That's all taste, but anyway. So,
thank you, Michael Ciravolo, who is the leader curator of Beauty and Chaos. Has been a longtime friend of mine for forever. Rafe Perlman, the vocalist, also is a longtime friend, and he's an incredible singer.
Yeah.
So Michael asked me if I would do a remix or something. I think remix is, the term is not really something I'm super excited with.
Yeah.
But he assured me that he would prefer a reimagining of the song. And so I just got into it, and I maintained some of the integrity of the chord structure that Michael had created initially. And then I took out a lot of the sections of the song that I felt that maybe diminished the power of Rafe's performance emotionally. But the only way I could do that really is to rework everything and replay the music. I was inspired by the initial track to begin with, and then it all just happened kind of quick because Michael's like, did you hit that track yet? I kind of need it. So we're close friends, and thankfully he trusts and respects me enough to just kind of divert from his initial idea and do my thing.
Yeah, the song's great. The video is great too. I'll have to put up a link for it for people. I think people.
Oh, that's right. They shot a video. They shot it here, I think.
Yeah, there's a bunch of footage of
my spot.
That's right. Yeah, and getting to watch the performances, kind of the behind the scenes making of. It's really well done. So just a couple more questions, Tyler. I want to circle back real quick on Deadpool. So it's interesting to me that film is so rife with humor and deadpan and vulgarity. And you play I think you've talked about this, but you play you don't play the soundtrack too much for the laughs. There's no kazoos going or bums when we hear a joke.
No slide whistle.
No, very good. That's right. So I wondered, was your thought that the contrast of your score would somehow emphasize the comedy? I mean, what was the thought process? Because that's just, you almost don't go a beat in that without some line you could miss for its comic effect.
That movie's so fascinating to work on because every cut, because as you're working on a film, the editor is refining the cut with the director and the producers and Ryan. And because Ryan's wearing the Deadpool mask, he constantly revises his jokes.
Oh,
so the picture may not change, but the joke changes. They really wanted the music to be straight for the most part. The jokes are funny enough. And I think the straighter the music is, the funnier the dialogue can be.
Yeah.
Obviously there is the moment with the choir that occurred. You can't stop this mother. That whole business really
holy something balls.
Yes. Yeah, I don't know what we can or cannot say here. But really, that was a great moment. And it's something that I try to set the table for on every scoring project. And that's for a really memorable moment as it applies to our life, all of us that are working on the film. And David Leitch is a terrific guy, the director. And I think that was my third movie with him. And that was his first choir session that he'd ever witnessed. So he walked in while we were working on that. And I hear David Hasselhoff is ringing my doorbell.
Oh, no.
So I know it's like a pop culture cauldron around here. But so anyway, David walked into the session and he was like completely blown away seeing the choir. And of course, I'm not one who can write a lyric that's going to go in the mouths of the choir. But I'm like, hey, Dave, if you pay attention to what their cadence is, we can, work with them and put some lyrics in their mouths. And he's like, are you serious? We can do that? And I'm like, of course we can. So we gave him a pad and pen and in about 15 minutes, he had these lyrics. And after the choir took their break, we just worked with them for a while. And it was so much fun. Everyone had just such an incredible time. And I actually spoke to that choir contractor, Sally Stevens, recently, a few days ago, actually. And she remarked on how that was the most fun session of her career. And, those moments are there to be seized upon. We're creating entertainment and we want to have fun in the process. Sure. And, so it's important to me to find those moments so that we all really feel the camaraderie of working together and remember that. You hear that?
Sounds like you've got guests. No, that song is it's you can't listen to it without smiling. It's great. It's a pick me up. My last question for you is a biographical question. My curiosity is killing me. In your bio, you say that you unwittingly dug a grave. I have to know what that is.
Several. Oh my God. Okay. So I didn't realize, one of my high school jobs, I always worked, but was working for a friend. This is all verifiable, but so I worked after school on this guy's property, and he has a birth defect, so he only has two fingers on one hand. And this was in the outskirts of Chicago in a rural area. So one day he asked me to dig in the yard with him. And so I was digging. It was kind of soft soil, but he was shoveling this white powder in to the trenches I was digging. And I'm like, what's that for? He says, in case the water runs in and stagnates, it'll eliminate the odor. I'm like, okay. I didn't think anything of it. Didn't think anything nefarious was at play. But so anyway, there was an instance where this person and his partner, let's say, in crime, were arrested for a robbery in London in 1981. And so years later, I was living about a third of a mile away from this property with my aunt, and I was going out for a run one day. This is, I'm a full-time musician at this point. And there were helicopters circling around. I see Eyewitness 7, and I'm like, oh my God. So I go back inside the house and I turn on the TV, and first thing I see is a camera shot from the helicopter on the property. And the first thing I hear is trace human remains are found in the shallow graves of blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, oh my God, I dug those graves. I can't believe it. So needless to say, I did have a knock at the door later that day to ask if I knew anything. And I just said, no, I'm renting a room here. So I know nothing.
That's a great story.
That was 8 years later. But that was one of the many, many remarkably bizarre moments in my life. Yeah.
There's. I encourage people to go check out Tyler's website. Even before he picked up his first guitar, his life was interesting. He's got a lot of interesting early stories. Well, hey, so what's next for you? What can you tell us that you're working on that we can watch for?
Okay. Well, Joanne Higginbottom and I are back on the second season of Gendy Tartakovsky's Primal.
Okay.
And Gendy has another show coming up that we'll be endeavoring in. And then Ty West, a director I've worked with in the past, has 2 movies that he's filming sequentially. And through my work with Chelsea Wolfe on the DC soundtrack, she had expressed that she wanted to explore film in some fashion. And then, Ty and I had discussed the concept for the score for his movies, and they're vocal centric. And she's an incredible singer. So I thought, why not, ask her to participate as my co-composer. So she is on both of those movies, the first of which is titled X, and the second one is titled Pearl. And there's a Jamie Foxx movie coming up, and a couple more TV shows, and looks like the John Wick 4 sometime this year. So,
oh well, no rest for the weary, huh?
Nope. But I'm always excited every day that I'm on this earth. There's always something cool that can happen. So
yeah, man.
Never short of inspiration.
Well, folks, if you get a chance, go take a look at Tyler's website. He's got such diversity across all these mediums of musical expression. It's been an honor, Tyler, to talk to you. Thank you for spending some time. And we will leave you to David Hasselhoff, who's probably back waiting for you in the living room or something.
Yes, he is. Yeah. No, he's great. He's a wonderful guy. I'm really glad that he's in my life. So,
all right, man. Well, thanks again. And for folks that are with us on the stream, I'm gonna do a replay of John Petrucci's interview where he talks about all of his doings for folks who want to watch that. So, Tyler, my friend, thank you so much, and we'll talk to you soon.
All right. Have a great day, Peter.
Okay. Take care.
All right. Take it easy.
Bye-bye.